You know what you're listening to?
Is that a trick question?
It's the I Still Love This Game podcast with your host, Matthew Damian.
He's an idiot. Don't listen to this. He's an idiot.
Hello and welcome to episode 63 of the I Still Love This Game podcast. In today's show, we're going to have a look at the Celtics and Cavs series preview for the Eastern Conference Finals, issues for Ben Simmons going forward in his career, and a very odd week, boy is that an understatement, for Dwayne Casey. Along with that, we're going to be answering a lot of your questions. We've got about 15 of them, so prepare yourselves. But we're going to have a look at the Celtics and Cavs before we go any further. And when you look at this series on paper, the Raptors are better than the Celtics are, at least from a talent standpoint. And we all saw what Cleveland just did to them. Now, of course, the Celtics play with a hell of a lot more heart and pride, and they have a true mastermind of a coach. But at the end of the day, they still have to slow down LeBron. And nobody has done that in the East since 2010, when, ironically, it was actually the Celtics, a very different Celtics team, but it still was the Celtics. The players that you would immediately think of as the likely candidates to guard LeBron, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Now, we don't know the status of Brown. He only started one game in that series against Philadelphia, and Tatum's still only a rookie. So their best bet might be Marcus Smart. He's tough, fearless, and he's a leader. And in many ways, he reminds me a bit of a Lance Stevenson, not with all the theatrics, but just his mindset of he'll put his body in between LeBron and the basket. He doesn't care what punishment he has to absorb, and you've got to respect that. You can also expect the Celtics to constantly pressure James and attempt to wear him down. The Cavs will need big performances from Korver, Smith, and Love to prevent Boston from doubling James. Now, I do like the Celtics' defensive abilities, especially after what we saw them do to the Sixers and Ben Simmons, but I've got no real confidence in their offense on the road. If Cleveland takes one of the first two games in Boston, the Celtics could be in major trouble, and that's exactly how I think it'll all go down. But honestly, don't listen to me. This might be the strangest thing I've said on this podcast. But please do not listen to me, because look at my track record when it's come to predicting the Celtics so far in these playoffs. I predicted the Bucks to beat them, and I predicted Philly to beat them. And so what do I really know? I mean, they just crushed Philly, and most people had them winning the East, not just making the conference finals. I even said that if they made the finals, the NBA finals, of course, not the conference finals, they would have a legitimate shot at winning the title, and they would not just be making up numbers. And of course, I was taking into account or envisioning them playing against either Houston or Golden State. And I wasn't saying that in order to create headlines or any of that stuff. It was just my honest opinion. The way that they played in the first round against Miami, we all were sucking into it. We really were. And Boston absolutely nailed them. But it would be foolish to not acknowledge that Philly's inexperience playing a role in that result against Boston. Now, you can't expect Boston to be able to rattle the Cavs like they got under the skin of the 76ers. And that's why I'm going with the Cavs to take this in 6. But I truly expect every single game to be competitive. Boston does not go down without a fight. And they will challenge them. They will absolutely challenge the Cavs. And I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to this nearly as much as I'm looking forward to the Rockets and Warriors series. So if you miss any of those games because you think that, this is really for third place, because the real NBA Finals, this is like a bronze medal match, the real NBA Finals out in the West, you're only hurting yourself here, because you're going to see some great basketball if you watch this series. Now, I mentioned just a second ago about what Boston did to Ben Simmons in Philadelphia. And if you saw the series, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Because a lot of times he'd be in pick and roll situations. This, of course, is Ben Simmons. He'd be in pick and roll situations from around the 3-point line. And the defender on him, not the big man defender, but the guy defending the ball, would just basically jump to foul line extended or even the dotted line in certain situations and just dare him to shoot jumpers, dare him to become a scorer. And in many ways, that reminded me a lot of when Rajon Rondo started to emerge around 2008, 2009, definitely 2010. And to Rondo's credit, he was still a very competent offensive player in terms of creating for his teammates. He had some big scoring games too. Let's not forget Game 2 of the 2011 conference finals, or 2012 conference finals, excuse me. In Miami, he had 44 points, something ridiculous like that. So he was a very capable scorer in spite of his inability to make jump shots. Now, his inability to make jumpers really stopped him from being a surefire Hall of Famer and maybe one of the top 10 point guards in NBA history. And this is my concern that I have for Ben Simmons. Obviously, Ben Simmons is a different person to Rajon Rondo. It's not always mechanics. It comes down to obviously work ethic and also mental. Shooting can be a mental thing. You can have blocks. You can have guys that work on their shots religiously, but they can't produce in games for whatever reason. And there's a lot that goes into it. So I'm not saying just because Rondo sucked as a shooter that Ben Simmons, that's his destiny. But it's something we have to keep in mind, because we may be saying the same thing about Ben Simmons, that, hey, he was a great player, but he just couldn't knock down a jumper. Conversely, you can look at Jason Kidd, who was terrible as a shooter, and then he developed into one of the best three-point shooters that we've seen in quite some time. And he was actually one of the... in the twilight of his careers in Dallas, he was one of their better shooters, if not their best shooter, when they won that title. And when he was an MVP candidate and probably should have won the award at least once, that was not a weakness. That was one of his strengths offensively. And even though he was the primary playmaker for that Nets team, when you look at who they had, whether it was Kenyon Martin or Keith Van Horn or Richard Jefferson or Kerry Kittles, it's kind of disturbing that I can just rattle those names off so quickly. But when you look at those names, Jason Kidd was their number one option scoring, not just creating. And as I said, he wasn't really a guy that could finish around the basket. He wasn't a Tony Parker or a Kyrie Irving or a Steve Francis. Obviously, they all finished different ways. I mean, Tony Parker, Kyrie Irving, they were just crafty in terms of getting shots up off the glass and finishing in that way. Then, of course, you see other point guards like Baron Davis or Steve Francis or Russell Westbrook that just elevate over the top of everybody and just finish that way. But Jason Kidd, his primary weapon scoring-wise was his jump shot. That was clearly not the case when he came into the league. So I'm just saying from a the only thing that I can see preventing Ben Simmons from being a Hall of Fame player and maybe even an MVP of this league and the face of this league is that jump shot. Now, whether or not he realizes it now, because he may be thinking, look, this is really my first year. It's not really, but he may be thinking it's my first year playing. I was able to get Philly to the second round. Life is good. It'll all work itself out. That's not good enough. We have high expectations for him. We want to see him evolve the game of basketball. And we were just as harsh on LeBron. Some will say I'm still just as harsh on LeBron because we want to see him continue to evolve and improve the game. And I don't want to see him settling into, well, I'm an all-star, that's good enough. That's not good enough for him. He should be the face of the NBA. And the only thing that could hold him back is his lack of a jumper. And the final topic that I wanted to discuss before we get to the questions is what an odd week for Dwayne Casey. First of all, he was named Coach of the Year, and then he was fired. Now, this is not without precedent. Actually, it happened not that long ago, when George Karl, of all people, was named Coach of the Year for the Denver Nuggets. This was the year that Steph Curry and Klay Thompson and those guys finally made the playoffs. And Denver was a number 3 seed. They won 50-something games. They got bounced in the first round by Steph Curry and those guys out in Golden State. George Karl was fired, even though he was Coach of the Year. And we just saw the same thing happen. Now, on a personal level, I don't think he deserved either. I don't think he should have got fired, and I don't think he should have got Coach of the Year. I definitely do not. That surprised me so much that he won Coach of the Year. Because when you look at the candidates, I'm not saying he did a bad job, by the way, but when you look at the candidates from Brad Stevens to Nate McMillan to Quinn Snyder to all those guys, and that's just like scratching the surface. Brett Brown is another example. LeBron James. Oh, I'm just kidding. That's a joke. That's just a joke. Believe me, he does not deserve Coach of the Year. All these coaches, they were able to improve their teams well, maybe not Brett Brown, although he did improve his team, but if I allow myself to finish this thought, I'm interrupting myself now. I didn't think that was possible. But from Brad Stevens to Snyder to Nate McMillan, they were really dealing with a decreased talent level for one reason or another. It might have been injuries, or it might have been what happened in the off-season with Paul George getting fired or Gordon Hayward leaving. They were able to get their teams to the next level despite that. Whereas Casey up in Toronto, their team did not. You could argue that they got a little bit better. They were playing better, but they didn't suffer big losses via free agency or injuries. So whilst he did a great job in the regular season, whilst he did a great job, he definitely didn't do as good of a job as a Brad Stevens or Nate McMillan or Snyder. Those three are by far and away the three best coaches in all of basketball right now. It's not even close. So a very, very odd week for Dwayne Casey, and we do have a question about him, and we can go right into it, and that is, where do I think Casey will end up? So you guys are on the ball. I was traveling all day, been traveling the last 2 days non-stop, and I was able to get this question. It was a good question. I would like to see him go to Milwaukee. I think that would be a good spot for him. It's not a huge market. He doesn't have the expectations of all of the Canadian basketball public on his shoulders, because obviously that's the only team in Canada. And they've got a lot of talent. You may even argue that they have more talent than what Toronto does. So it would be interesting. I think Casey, we talk about role players, but there's certain roles for certain coaches too. And certain coaches, their niche is to get teams to a higher level, get them into the playoffs consistently, get them into winning home court advantage in the first couple of rounds of the playoffs. And I think that's the next step that Milwaukee needs to take. Now, of course, there's a ceiling on some of these coaches as well, and I think Casey has that ceiling where he's just not a very good playoff coach because he can't. I don't think he has the ability to really game plan for one team. He's good at getting the most out of his plays in the regular season, but we've seen time after time again of him just falling short in the playoffs, getting swept 3 out of 4 times. And whilst I don't think he deserved to get fired, I do think that there is I should reword that. I personally would not have fired him. I think I would have made changes to the roster first, and then if we still saw similar results, then sure, then he had to go. But there was enough justification there to get rid of him, not just for this season, but whenever you get swept 3 out of 4 years in the Eastern Conference, no less, then yes. And 2 of those 3 sweeps was when you had home court advantage. Then yeah, there is a lot of justification there for him getting fired. Milwaukee, I think that would probably be his best destination for him. But maybe he sits out a year or two. But the problem is sometimes if you sit out a year or two, you become a little bit stale. Just ask George Karl. Although he did go coach Sacramento, and what a disaster that was. But whilst we're on the topic of coaching, I had another question somewhere. Oh yeah, here we are. And the reason I remembered this was because Milwaukee actually gave her the interview. And what do I think about Becky Hammond getting interviews to be a head coach? Now, I'm only aware of Milwaukee giving her an interview. I'm not sure if anyone else gave her an interview. I could be wrong with that. And if she's capable as a coach, then what difference does it make? I don't want to see. I would hate to see her get the job, and I think she would probably hate to get the job just to be the first female head coach in the NBA. But it's not a physical requirement. It's not like you need to be able to handle the rigors of being an NBA coach. Just I've never seen her in that capacity before as being a head coach. But if she is capable of doing it, then what difference does it make? And it goes both ways, as I said. I do not want to see her get it simply because she's a woman, but I also would hate to see her not get it simply because she's a woman. Next question is asking me if I caught Nick Wright's comments regarding Kyrie Irving's former and current team making it to the conference finals without him. So to answer the first question, or the question, well, I could be a real jerk about this and say, no, I didn't catch the comments. But now I've caught the comments, so I'll give you my points. Look, I do not watch any cable television. I got rid of that a long time ago. So if there's anything on cable TV in terms of sports, there's a good chance I haven't seen it. The only reason I would see it is if you guys send me the links. So I will respond to this, trusting you, Sean, that you've quoted him accurately. And what a bunch of nonsense, really. What if that's what he said? That's. I hate to say this, but this is why a lot of people hate LeBron fans. They really hate LeBron fans to the point where they are so negative towards LeBron because of his fan base. Because look at this sentiment that's now being put out there. Kyrie, now, in order to elevate LeBron, they will step on their own children. And maybe that sounds a bit far-fetched, but 2 years ago, they would have taken a bullet for Kyrie Irving. Now they're saying he's nothing. That's the narrative that they're trying to bring out. They can go do something very unpleasant to themselves because I have to be aware of the iTunes rating. Believe me, I wanted to say something very different to that. But the fact is that now, because he's no longer alongside LeBron, they would do anything to elevate. I'll give them points for creativity. I will actually give, because this is the creativity on this is unprecedented, because the levels that have to go into this. Now that Kyrie Irving is away from LeBron, they're trying to elevate everything LeBron has done and disregard any help that he's ever had. So in order to try and disregard it, they're trying to say, well, Kyrie Irving really wasn't that good of a player, because now his current team, the Boston Celtics, still made the conference finals. His former team still made the conference finals. Without Kyrie Irving, I hate to say this, and they know this. If they don't know this, then they are severely delusional. But without Kyrie Irving, they do not win the 2016 finals. But they are trying to twist that around to make it look like it was all LeBron that made that won the 2016 finals. And it was just so funny when you think about this, right? Because their biggest excuse for LeBron and the Cavs losing in 2015 was the fact that Kyrie Irving was injured. Oh my goodness. This stuff gives me a headache. It really does. But yes, I think this is one of the more pathetic and desperate attempts that you will see. And this is why I don't buy into the whole LeBron versus Jordan thing, because we're not really hearing great arguments for LeBron. All we're hearing about is other people and trying to bring down others in order to elevate him. If someone could just lay out a really good argument for LeBron, like without twisting and turning and putting others down and having different standards for LeBron, i.e. losing in the finals is now somehow better than winning in the finals because he's going up against better teams, but he's still losing to them. I don't know how that works, but they've somehow tried to manipulate that. I mean, if I was a psychologist, that you could do an entire conference on this LeBron James worshipping thing. Anyway, let's go to the next question. And given the playoff history of the Rockets, what makes you confident they can beat the Warriors? Now, this is a question that I got quite a bit of, right? Obviously, in the previous podcast, I predicted the Rockets to beat the Warriors. There's a couple of reasons. The first is obviously the pace of play. I don't want to harp on this too much because I did virtually the entire episode of this. But the pace of play, when things go bad for the Warriors, when their backs are against the wall, they go to that lineup of death, right? And that's with Iggy, Durant, Green, Thompson, and Curry. And what usually happens with that, because they're a smaller team, they're looking to push the tempo, get more shots up. But if they do that up against the Rockets, they are playing into the Rockets' hands, because the Rockets would like that style more than anything. They are the one team that I have seen that the Warriors have to pull back a little bit and try to slow things down, because they don't want to get into that track meet against the Rockets, because the Rockets can do it nearly as well, but they have more depth. So the starting lineup, or the core players, can do it nearly as well as the starting lineup for the Warriors. But then you go and you got Gerald Green, you got Eric Gordon, you got Ryan Anderson, you got these guys that would just come off the bench that are more than capable, Joe Johnson as well, more than capable on any given night getting you 15, 20 points off the bench. So that's reason number one. Reason number two is, yes, I agree with you that their playoff history is somewhat of a concern. But we have seen it happen in NBA history where teams that have had playoff demons in front of them and question marks really excel and rise to the moment. The best example I can think of that is the 2011 Dallas Mavericks. Dirk Nowitzki, everyone called him a choker after what happened in 2006 and 2007, of course. And I personally think those two playoff series were the worst two playoff losses for any superstar in the history of basketball. Think about this. They're up 2-0 up against the Miami Heat. They're heavily favored in the first place. Now they're up 2-0, up by 15 or so points in the third quarter. Look like they may actually go on and sweep this series. Had they had held on that lead, they would have been up 3-0, right? And then they end up losing that series. Some will say controversially, but the record books will say they lost that series. They lost 4 straight games. They couldn't guard Dwayne Wade. They couldn't handle Lonzo Mourning coming off the bench and just protecting the rim. They couldn't do anything to stop those two guys, and they lost the next 4 games. Next season, with Avery Johnson as their coach, they win 67 games. During the season, it looked like they may challenge the Bulls' 72-win record at that point. Obviously, the Warriors now have 73 wins, but they didn't win the championship, so they're still not the standard. Anyway, but back then the Warriors hadn't done it at that point, right? So 72 was the standard, and it looked like they were flirting for a period of time of going after that record. Dirk was the MVP. They get to the first round. They're playing the Golden State Warriors with Baron Davis and Steven Jackson and Monte Ellis and those guys. And they get drilled. I mean, it was a 6-game series, but it felt like it was really a 4 or 5-game series. Golden State just absolutely annihilated them in the first round. And up until that point, we had seen number 8 seeds beating the number 1 seeds, but never in that fashion. And quite honestly, never since. I guess maybe Memphis up against San Antonio was similar to that, where the Spurs, by the skin of their teeth, forced a 6-game. Manu Ginobili was hitting fadeaway threes. They had lost the first game, and then game 2, he came back and was hitting ridiculous shot after ridiculous shot just to tie the series. And but beyond that, I can't remember an 8 seed just thoroughly dominating a number 1 seed like that. So the point that I was making is everybody said about Dirk Nowitzki that he was a choker, that he was never going to deliver in the playoffs. And then in 2011, man, he put together one of the best playoff runs from an offensive standpoint. And the reason I say that is other players have better numbers, but look at who he was surrounded by. Jason Terry was a pretty good scorer off the bench, but to have him as your number 2 option shows how limited they were. They had Jason Kidd, who was nothing more than a defensive player and a great shooter. You had Shawn Marion, not a very good offensive player. You had Tyson Chancellor, not a very good offensive player. You had Deshaun Stevenson, not a very good offensive player. They were a very good defensive team. But all the responsibility and burden really came down on Dirk's shoulders. And he delivered big time. He was dominant in every single playoff series. He had some great performances. So who would have thought? Who would have seen that coming? And people would have said the exact same things about the Dallas Mavericks if someone was to pick them against the Lakers in the second round, or even against the Thunder in the conference the conference finals, or the Miami Heat in the NBA finals. People probably would have said, well, what about their playoff history? It's a fair question because it does have to be taken into account. But just because they have underachieved individually leading up until this point doesn't mean they're destined to continue that. Let's stick with the Houston theme. Here we are. If Houston loses to Golden State, what would it say about their season? An absolute disappointment. There's no other way you can look at it. Kyle Lowry said that this was championship or bust for the Raptors. And I think it's safe to say that there's a lot more expectations on the Rockets than was the Raptors heading into the playoffs. Look, they've made the conference finals. They've looked pretty good in making the conference finals. If they lose, even if it's in 7 games, it'll be a complete disaster for them. It'd be just like the Sacramento Kings when they lost to the Lakers. Nobody thought it was an achievement for them to make the conference finals. And the same applies here. Hell, even if they make it to the NBA finals and lose, that will be considered a disappointment. It may even be considered a bigger disappointment because they would have shown their abilities in beating Golden State, but then lost to Cleveland or Boston. And I think everybody will agree that neither of those teams, hell, even if you combine them, but neither of those teams are as talented as Golden State. So yeah, it's championship or bust for them. And I did just mention the Toronto Raptors and Kyle Lowry, so we're going to segue into another question, and that is, how good could the Raptors have been if T-Mac didn't leave? That's an interesting question. I've had this conversation with people before, and it's not just if T-Mac didn't leave, but had they not traded Damon Stoudemire for Kenny Anderson, they did trade Damon Stoudemire for Kenny Anderson, and then they traded Kenny Anderson for Chauncey Billups. So I mean, they just had a massive rotating door there, and I'm not sure if Isaiah Thomas was still general manager of that team. He did a good job in drafting some of these players, but if he was trading these players, man, what a train wreck that was. So had they not traded Damon Stoudemire, who was a Rookie of the Year, and he may have been an All-Star replacement. Don't quote me on that, but I think he may have been an All-Star player one year as well. And then had they not traded Marcus Camby for Charles Oakley, and then on top of that, you think about what they did on draft night when they had the number 5 pick in the draft, and they traded that to Indiana for Antonio Davis, who ended up being an All-Star for them. And of course, the Pacers ended up drafting Jonathan Bender. So had they had a starting 5 of Damon Stoudemire, Vince Carter, Tracy McGrady, Marcus Camby, Antonio Davis, that's a pretty complete starting 5. Plus, you would have a coach in Lenny Wilkins, who was coaching them when they made the second round and lost to the 76ers in 7 games, I believe it was. So that's an interesting team. I think that team could have won a championship. And a lot of people think that if T-Mac and Vince Carter stayed together, they could have won the East. If you had that full complement of players here, Antonio Davis, Marcus Camby, Damon Stoudemire alongside them, I don't know. I think that team could have won a title. Maybe not against the Lakers, but if they ran into San Antonio in 2003, for example, I don't know. I think they could have gotten over the line with that. Because you might be thinking, well, Antonio Davis, Marcus Camby, they're a bit small up front, but you still have explosive scoring in Tracy McGrady and Vince Carter. That poses problems for any team to handle. But it is a pretty small lineup, but I think they could have won a title. And I'm not trying to, believe me, I'm not trying to pour sand down the thirsty throats of the Toronto Raptors. I'm just being realistic with you. But I mean, you could do that with a lot of teams, though. You could go back and say, well, what if they, hindsight's 2020. But I'm being asked what would have happened if, what could have happened with the Raptors if T-Mac didn't leave. Well, other situations as well. They could have won a couple of championships. Next question I've got is would the Warriors be a championship, have won a championship had they kept Mark Jackson? I'm not sure, because Mark Jackson, we don't know how good Mark Jackson was. Now, I talked about Dwayne Casey and other coaches. Doug Collins comes to mind, that they have really good roles in getting teams to the playoffs and competitive that they weren't competitive before. Mark Jackson did one of the greatest jobs we have seen in recent memory in getting Golden State to the playoffs and making them competitive. But I don't know if he could have gotten them to the next level, because they actually did regress a little bit. I mentioned this before when I was talking about when they knocked off the Denver Nuggets. The very next round, they went up against the Spurs, and they very nearly took a 2-0 series lead, despite both home games being in San Antonio. And they gave the Spurs all they could handle in that second round series, and the Spurs beat them in 6. But that was a pretty good series. And the next year, they were bounced in the first round by the Clippers. And that was despite the Clippers going through that whole Donald Sterling drama. So they actually regressed a little bit. Then, of course, they fired Mark Jackson. They brought in Steve Kerr. And next year, they win the title. So we haven't seen Mark Jackson in a role since. Is it possible that he could have got him to the title still? Yeah, because I don't rate Steve Kerr as a coach. I don't think he's a good coach. I think he's been blessed with some amazing assistant coaches like Alvin Gentry, Mike Brown, and Luke Walton. But I don't think he's a great head coach. And if you replace him with Mark Jackson, it wouldn't surprise me if they had the similar success. But I can't sign off on it just because Steve Kerr did have the vision to put Iguodala off the bench, and that really opened up the game for Draymond Green, gave him a lot more minutes, and he developed. So that was very, very smart on his from him for Steve Kerr's point of view. But I'm still not sold that Mark Jackson couldn't have got... I can't answer that question. Quite honestly, no one could answer that question. I'm trying to... It wouldn't surprise me either way, but I'm sorry, I don't really have an answer for that one. Next question is... Okay, we've got quotations here. Jordan might have been better at his best, but James has already put together the best career... their best NBA career we've ever seen, end quote. That's from a Kevin Pelton. And the question is, what are my thoughts on that? I'm glad you guys can't see me because I'm shaking my head. What is LeBron? What is he the best at? Is he the best winner? No, clearly not. Is he the best scorer? No. Is he the best combination player? I can't put that. I can't even give him that because he doesn't play defense. So if we're going to exclude defense from it, then he's not better than Magic. It's hard to take that seriously, isn't it? Jordan, I'm trying to reread it. Jordan might have been better. So emphasis on might. He's not even giving that to him. Might have been better at his best, but James has already put together. That's insane. James has already put to the best NBA career we've ever seen. You know what? Talk to Bill Russell and ask him if he's had a better career than Bill Russell. Has he had a better career than Wilt Chamberlain? Has he had a better career than MJ? Has he had a better career than Kareem? Has he had... I could go on and on. Next question. Were LeBron's 2-game winners in this playoffs actually clutch? The score was tied, so was there no pressure? This is even dumber than the last question. Of course there was pressure. My goodness. And people say that I never defend LeBron. Here we are. I'm defending LeBron. That's one of the dumbest things that I have seen. This, the shifting of the goalposts. If those shots, there was no pressure, then Kyrie Irving's shot in Game 7, there was no pressure. Jordan's game winner over Byron Russell in Game 1. Not Game 7, they never went to Game 7, but Game 1 of the 97 playoffs, or 97 finals. You know, when Carmelo misses the foul shots, Jordan gets a defensive rebound, they call timeout, score's tied because Malone missed the foul shots. Jordan takes a power dribble, Russell swipes at the ball, and Jordan elevates and drills it as the buzzer goes off. Are we going to say that's not a clutch shot? Of course it's a clutch shot. And for people to say otherwise, they're just... Boy, oh boy. Next question is, how can somebody be coach of the year and be fired in the same season? I sort of touched on this. It has happened before, obviously, with George Karl. Now it's happened now with Dwayne Casey. It's a bit of an oddity, though. I do get what you're saying. It's kind of like being MVP and then being traded or something like that, because it's being fired. It's not you quitting. I can understand like a coach being coach of the year and then quitting. But for a team to say, you were coach of the year, but we still don't like you. But it just goes to show the difference between regular season basketball and playoff basketball. And you can be very successful as a player or as a coach in regular season, but in the playoffs, if you don't produce, they will show you the door. And that's why there's such an emphasis on winning. And the same applies for the first round and the second round as opposed to the NBA Finals. That is why Jordan's 6 for 6 is held in such a high regard. Anyway, next question. Who is the best player LeBron has defeated in the Eastern Conference? Boy, you guys are just baiting me into this, aren't you? Roy Hibbert? No. I would say Derrick Rose. Yeah, we'll go with Derrick Rose because you might want to throw Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett's name out there, but were they even All-Stars in 2011 and 2012? I don't think they were. They were clearly not in their primes. Derrick Rose just came off an MVP year. Now, the thing you have to take into account, and this is why I don't put a lot of stock in LeBron's finals appearances, is because he lost to guys like the old Kevin Garnett, like the old Paul Pierce, but Rajon Rondo was the leader of that team. He lost to guys like Dwight Howard. And this is when, of course, he was the first stint in Cleveland. Then he teamed up with Chris Bosh and Dwayne Wade. So you've got to put that as an asterisk too, because, yeah, he did go through and beat the MVP in Derrick Rose. But I think everybody, even diehard Miami Heat fans, will agree with you that if you if you took off LeBron from Miami and Derrick Rose from Chicago, and you just line up the rosters without those two guys, that Miami is clearly the better team. Well, you got Dwayne Wade, you got Bosh, you got Mike Miller. I think Shane Battier was on that team as well. You've got a lot of talent there still. So, at least a lot more than what Chicago had. So you've got to apply a little bit of context there as well. But I will go with Derrick Rose as the best player that LeBron has defeated in the Eastern Conference. What do I think of the argument that Jordan played in a quote-unquote weak era? We're going to finish on that, I think. And I think it's absolute nonsense. Because you look at weak according to who? And you looked at just who he went through in the NBA Finals. People say that, name a great team that he went through in the NBA Finals. Okay, so we went through, prior to getting to the NBA Finals, he had to go through a team that had 4 Hall of Famers. Rodman, 3 Hall of Famers, sorry. I don't think Lambeer made the Hall of Fame. 3 Hall of Famers. Rodman, Joe Dumars, and Isaiah Thomas. And the bad boy Pistons. People say they were old. There was a lot of tread on their tires, but Isaiah Thomas was barely 30. Actually, I don't even think he was 30. Excuse me, sorry. My voice is breaking. So that will definitely be the last question. And then he would go up against Magic and the Lakers. And sure, I get it that Kareem was no longer there, but Kareem was on his last legs after the 85 finals anyway. He wasn't a superstar of the game anymore. It was Magic Johnson. Magic was only 31. And only 1 year prior, he was the MVP of the league. Of course, then he would get AIDS, and that would change everything. But that's the reason he retired. It was because of the HIV virus, not because he was old and tired and worn out, like my voice. And then the next year, he'd go up against and he would beat Patrick Ewing, and he would beat in the semifinals, the conference semifinals, and then Clyde Drexler. Both guys are Hall of Famers. Both guys were dream teamers. And this is when they were in their prime. Clyde Drexler was runner-up in the MVP voting. I mean, he was no joke. And then the year after, he went through Ewing again. Went through Dominique Wilkins in the first round. Both guys obviously Hall of Famers. Went through Charles Barkley, the MVP. Not even the MVP runner-up like Drexler. He was actually the MVP, Charles Barkley. And then the year after that, he would go through... the next championship year, he would go through Tim Hardaway. Should be a Hall of Famer, but he's not. Alonzo Mourning is a Hall of Famer, coached by Pat... and the coach was Pat Riley in the first round for Miami. And that team would actually be the conference finals next year. And then the next round, Patrick Ewing again got it, and then the series after that was Shaq and Penny and that Orlando team, and then Gary Payton and Sean Kemp in the NBA Finals. The season after that, Chris Webber should be in the Hall of Fame, but he's not. Rod Strickland was All NBA second team. as a guard, which is really like being all NBA first team, because Jordan was occupying one of those spots at the guard position. There was really only one spot available left, and it's very hard for a guard to get in at that point. And then in the second round, it was up against Dikembe Mutombo, a Hall of Famer, and the Atlanta Hawks. And then, as I said, the conference finals was Tim Hardaway and Alonzo Mourning. And then they went up against Utah Jazz. And the year after that was the New Jersey Nets, then the Charlotte Hornets with Glenn Rice. And we know the 7-game series against the Indiana Pacers in the conference finals, and then the Utah Jazz again. These are all great teams. And yeah, if you want to make the argument that the NBA Finals has been a little bit tougher, if you just look at the NBA Finals, it's been a little bit tougher, sure. But you would, for people to demand that people that support Jordan as being the greatest player of all time, they demand that they accept that, but they won't acknowledge what an absolute cakewalk it has been for LeBron to get to the finals in the first place is nuts. Anyway, I'm going to go before my voice completely checks out. We will not have a podcast tomorrow. We will have one after Game 1 between the Celtics and Cavs. Please send through more of your questions. Keep them coming. And will allow us to do more episodes. If we see the questions start to die off a little bit, we'll have to just merge the episodes and do... because otherwise, we'll get 8-9 minute episodes going up. But thanks so much for the episodes. Thanks for listening, guys. Enjoy Game 1, and I'll catch you guys soon.